Okay, this is recording. I'm gonna give myself a countdown to start. And I'm gonna do that in Hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 22 of the Nerd Federation podcast. I am your host, Will Hernandez, and this is your weekly podcast for some things pro wrestling and video games related. It's a Tuesday night. The weather is fine out. Actually, it's more than fine out. And we're coming to you live from the Mid Hudson Valley here in upstate New York. And yeah, so I'm doing things a little bit differently this week, and I am purely recording the episode in Zencaster because the plan is hopefully maybe to put this on YouTube. But I could also see the great thing about these platforms that are out there is that you can easily download the audio and do whatever you want with it. And, I can take the audio from this and easily slide it into GarageBand and make it seem like I recorded the episode natively in GarageBand. But yeah, this is trying to do something different as far as bringing more awareness to the podcast. And one of the things that they tell you is to do a video podcast to help with that. So that's what we're doing here on a Tuesday night, and just a few days from a big weekend in pro wrestling, because not only is there one big pay-per-view this weekend on Saturday, but there are two. You've got TNA on Saturday. You've got AEW on Sunday, and I will be watching both shows. And I'll get into the second half of this in this episode talking about this weekend, but we're going to start this week on the video game side of things. And I feel like it's been a while since I've done that because honestly, with WrestleMania season, I was very into what was going on in the pro wrestling world. And now we're kind of past that. We're kind of pumping the brakes a little bit on the pro wrestling. Don't worry, it's still going to be there. That's never going to go away because I feel as though sometimes there should be a pro wrestling only podcast, but there are just too many of those out there. And I think it's better if I focus my energy on both these forms of entertainment, whether it's pro wrestling and video games, and with some other things mixed in. I wanted to mix in the I wanted to mix in Fallout this week. That's what I was trying to say. I wanted to mix in Fallout this week, but I just did not get a chance to watch it over the weekend. I was playing around in my head because it's 8 episodes the first season. So my idea was to do 2 episodes a week. This way, 2, 4, 6, 8. I am getting 4 weeks of content out of that, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to start watching it this week. So we'll see how many episodes I do watch before the show next week, episode number 23. This is episode number 22. But adjacent to that, as far as what's going on with Fallout, because it's interesting, right? When The Last of Us, actually, let's take a step back. When Cyberpunk, oh God, what was that anime called? The Netrunners came out. That was, I think, now 2 years ago. The interesting thing about that anime, and it was on Netflix, and I highly recommend watching that. It's the first anime I ever watched. So that was kind of one thing. And it is an anime at the end of the day. It was the first anime I had ever watched, and it was done really, really well. I mean, I think you should really whether you're an anime fan or not, go out of your way and watch that anime. The funny thing is, though, when Netrunners came out, a lot of people, including myself, either jumped back into Cyberpunk or jumped into it for the first time. I was the latter, where I jumped into it for the first time because there was something about the way they did that, presented that world in that anime, that made me want to jump in there and play the game for the first time. It was on my list. I have bought it. It had just been sitting there for a while. Actually, one of the few uh, games that I owe these days physically. So you had that part of it, and even though I didn't necessarily love Cyberpunk, I just didn't. It was just kind of one of those things where maybe I wasn't in the right mind space for that game. But I do want to go back because I do want to play it again, and this time talk about Phantom Liberty. I played a Phantom Liberty DLC, but going back to Fallout, the interesting thing now is people are returning to Fallout, which I think is great because it's a series that in some cases has been much maligned, I think, over the years. And I'm going to kind of get into that a little bit, but I thought it was funny as I kind of think about timestamps. But then again, I'm recording this on video, so I'm gonna have to go back and look at the audio again. And so while everybody was jumping into Fallout, whether it was Fallout 4 or Fallout 76, and they were doing that because of the rave reviews that the Fallout TV show was getting on Amazon, I decided to zag while everybody else was zigging and jump back into Starfield over the weekend. And it's been a while since I've chatted about Starfield on this podcast. I can't remember. Let's see, what episode was that I basically talked about Starfield really oh, it was this was episode 7. Go back to episode 7, and the title of that was Starfield still has your attention. And I forget what the reasoning was for that. Well, let's see what the description was of that episode. This is the beauty of this. Yeah, Starfield, nearly 4 months after its release, is still on the tip of many tongues. That's what she said, and not for the best reasons. Anyway, you know what's funny about that episode? And I'm going to talk about Star Wars Outlaws this week. Oh, that's kind of funny because it's kind of a throwback. Look at that. Go back to episode 7 if you want to get an idea about what I was talking about with Starfield back then. But so, been a while, right? It's been since episode 7. But I have said this over the course of the life of this podcast, is that I have never finished the main campaign because I got distracted by Spider-Man 2 in October. So the game comes out at the end of August. I paid for the upgrade on Game Pass to get the DLC, to get the early access. I think the early access was maybe five days. So I did that, and I kept on playing it until Spider-Man 2 came out in October. And then I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to go back to Starfield and finish that. And I never did. And I didn't do that until I think I started playing it on Saturday night, if I'm not mistaken. And part of the reason why I went back to play it is simple. I miss playing a video game where I was shooting shit. I mean, honestly, that's where a lot of it comes from. And as much as I've been enamored with Prince of Persia, I love a good shooter. Always have, always will. It's the reason why games like Halo and Gears of War are always going to be at the top of the list for me as far as favorite games of all time. And while Starfield's shooting mechanics aren't great, though I think now they feel better than they did the first time around, it's a game that's very familiar to me because of the time that I spent with it last fall. So when I jumped back into it over the weekend, I quickly fell back into this routine of the game. I know Starfield got mixed reviews. There's no denying that. It's one of those games right now, and still all these months later, that you either love or you hate. And I'm sure there are people in the middle. There are the people that think it's a mid game that's good enough, which is fine. That's fine. But playing that game over the weekend, and I thought to myself, wow, I still love Starfield after all this time later. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It's the same way I say about AEW, right? You can criticize things that you love. Anyway, even with the updates since I last played, the NPCs still do some weird things in this fucking game. But I'm still in love with the gameplay loop. I'm still in love with this sci-fi esque story that they have going on. Not even sci-fi esque. It's a sci-fi story. Is it? Does it have common tropes in it? Sure. I mean, what sci-fi these days is truly original? But I still love that story. I still love the storytelling that's in the game, and I still love exploring what the game has to offer. And as I was playing it over the weekend, I thought to myself, I don't know if I'm necessarily playing this game any differently than I did before. I think I might be playing it a little bit more deliberately this time around. The main story is about 25 to 30 hours, and honestly, I'm already 10 hours deep. That's how much time I've put into this game already, where I feel like I already kind of I already know what decisions I want to make in some sense. So I am trying to kind of mainline the game. I don't want to get too sidetracked while I'm playing it. And maybe it's possible that I finish the main mission, the main story within the next 4 weeks, depending on how much I play. But I'm still playing Prince of Persia at the same time, and I'll get into that a little bit. So basically, I'm alternating between the two games every time I turn on my Xbox. And I've been playing a lot of my Xbox the last month. Ever since I put down Final Fantasy 16 on PlayStation 5, I haven't touched my PlayStation. It's just been sitting there. And that just happens to me. I go back and forth between the two systems. But the funny thing I thought about jumping into Starfield again over the weekend is it got me thinking about this thing that you hear about as far as people talking about playing cozy games. And as much as I think that label is weird in some respects, and I didn't really start hearing it until maybe 2 to 3 years ago. And then when I got more active on threads, I saw that moniker, that label all over the place. And it usually has to do with games like Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley. Never played Stardew Valley, but I have played Animal Crossing. I think a lot of people played Animal Crossing in 2020 when the pandemic hit because that was like the game for a very long time. And that game sold a shit ton of copies because of the pandemic. Anyway, I decided yesterday, and I was giving this some thought and thinking about the way people talk about cozy games, but Starfield is my cozy game, which is weird to say in some respects because for a good portion of the game, you're going around killing space pirates. I mean, that's what you're doing. And it's pretty damn fucking awesome, I have to say. And going through that gameplay loop over the weekend and into yesterday, because I was playing it a little bit last night as well. That's why I'm 10 and a half hours in already, even over 2, 3 days. It just makes me wonder how some people just downright hated this game. And I know Bethesda has a lot of. It's an interesting company right now because when it was independent from on its own thing from Microsoft. I think people were in some ways giving them the benefit of the doubt. By the way, if you're on video and you keep on looking over to my right, it's because I've got the Mets game off to the side here. And yes, I know I'm wearing a fucking Blue Jays hat in the video, but I like to collect my hats. So keep the comments to yourself. That's just the way I am. It's a fashion thing. I don't know what you want me to do. I'm also wearing my Mustafa Ali shirt, and I'll stand up here in the video. As you can see that right there. I got that for the upcoming show, even though I'm going to wear my Jordan Grace t-shirt for the show coming up here under Siege in Albany. Anyway, going back to, I get a little sidetracked there. Going back to Bethesda, when the talk about Bethesda, and I'm not somebody who's really played a lot of Bethesda games. I played a little bit of Skyrim. I'll get into that. Played some Fallout 4. But the criticism against Bethesda is that when Fallout 4 came out, it seemed very outdated because of what The Witcher was able to do in the same genre of action RPG. Now, I never played The Witcher. I know. It's a glaring hole in my video game history. But people didn't have good feelings going into Starfield for that very reason. And in the past couple of weeks, it just happens, been listening to some podcasts, and it came up that there are just folks that universally pan Starfield as being boring. And honestly, I don't get it. I think in some ways, ignorance is bliss for me, right? For all the chatter about Fallout that's happening right now, as I mentioned before, I've only played Fallout 4, and I only got into it for a few hours and I dropped it. The same thing happened with Skyrim. I didn't get it. Now, keep in mind, back then when I was playing video games, when those games were really, Skyrim in particular, I think, and then to an extent Fallout 4, I wasn't really playing those types of games. I was more of the shooter, sports game type of person for a very long time. And I've talked about that on this podcast before. But I think if I went back and I played Fallout 4 and I played Skyrim, I would have a much more appreciation for those games. And now people, again, it's funny, hindsight's always 2020. People are watching the show and now they are going back to Fallout 4 and saying, "Oh, this wasn't so bad. This isn't so bad." This is what I'm hearing from people on the internets. But going back to Starfield, for some reason, out of the 3 Bethesda games I've played, Starfield struck with me. And it stuck with me. I should say it stuck with me. And I think that's why I love it as much as I do. And it's probably because I didn't play Skyrim or Fallout 4 long enough to have the same appreciation for those games as others do. And I realize the biggest problem that people have with Starfield is that it doesn't have the sense of exploration as the aforementioned games. I can't even say that word. Aforementioned games. But I think that's okay because, for me anyway, because I think I do get open world fatigue, and people complain in Starfield about kind of, you can just fast travel everywhere and you can't just really like explore the way you did in Skyrim and in Fallout 4 and the Fallout games in general. And you know what? That's okay with me. I'm okay with fast traveling everywhere, because time is money for me. And I want to enjoy these games. Don't get me wrong, but I also want to get through them as quickly as possible. So shout out to Starfield. I'll be curious to see what people say in the comments, because I am going to title this video something that has to do with Starfield. And again, shout out to Starfield because I'm loving it all over again. And I'm looking forward to finally finishing the main campaign of the game. I mentioned before that I am playing Prince of Persia. Still playing it. I think since Saturday, I've put about 5 hours into it. It's getting to this point now where I'm playing it 1 to 2 hours at a time, then putting it down, then coming back to it. And I think the reason why is because of the type of game that it is very, very frustrating in some respects. I mean, it really is. I'm watching my video over here and it seems to be flickering a little bit, and I don't know why. And I don't know if that's going to come out in the final product. Anyway, apologies for that. I know I got to do a better job with getting maybe some better video because I'm using the video camera that's on my MacBook Pro. So I don't know. I don't know what's happening with that, but I'm getting to this point, and I might be a little bit by it now that I'm thinking about it because, like I said, I got through a main area last night and I took a pause. But the platforming part of the game is getting more difficult. But they're doing it in some very unique ways. And again, for somebody who doesn't play these types of games, I don't know if this is just a natural thing that happens in Metroidvania or not, but bear with me. So there's one section of the game where you have this encounter in this environment, I should say, that I would best describe as sand waterfalls. The waterfalls are always moving in a downward direction, which makes sense, even in a video game, the environment. Because a waterfall, obviously, the flow is south, going down. But you can also move up the waterfall by continuously pressing the jump button. So it's very clever. It's a very clever mechanic in that way. And I'm honestly not sure if other Metroidvanias have a similar mechanic where, I don't know, maybe there's a waterfall. That sounds really weird. And you can kind of travel within it. But nonetheless, it's a pretty cool experience and environmental thing. And I think it's stuff like this waterfall that keeps me coming back to play the game. At one point on Saturday, I almost completely gave up on the game, honestly, because it was getting frustrating. And I have very little patience. I think over the weekend was the first time I looked up having to look how to do an assortment of puzzles because honestly, I took a look at those puzzles. I think the first one I actually figured out on my own, believe it or not. And then I looked up the remaining three puzzles and I thought to myself, I probably would not have figured this out on my own because I am just not good at puzzles and video games. It's just not my thing. And I am not playing a video game to complete fucking puzzles. That's just the way I am. I've always been that way. I mentioned this before that I'm worried about Indiana Jones because I know that's going to have puzzles in it, but we shall cross that bridge when we get there later on this year. But going back to almost giving up on the game, I got to a new environment that had some new enemies and a new ways to platform. And I think the new way, if I'm not mistaken, is this whole the sand mechanic. Um, but yeah, it suddenly got me back into the game because I thought just when I was getting tired with a certain environment in that game, I was able to get by it and on to like the next quote unquote level or next mission. Basically, every mission is basically taking you through our new environment. And the map on this game is so fucking overwhelming because it is a Metroidvania and there are different sections in this map and I was using the map constantly. Basically there's a button you can press on the Xbox controller that immediately brings up the map. So move a few minutes, move whatever to the right, to the left, and then press the map. Okay, am I going the right way? Yada, yada, yada. Making sure I buy the map extension thing from the the little girl that you meet along the way that sells you hints and things like that. I don't think it's a spoiler, but when she comes around and has like a map pack to buy, which I kind of think is kind of funny in a way, I go ahead and I make sure I buy that from her. I will say, and I mentioned this before, that Prince of Persia prompted me to jump back into Starfield because I wanted to shoot shit again. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I am 14 hours into playing this game. And don't forget, I die a lot. I don't think I die to the effect of I'm adding like hours and hours and hours to the experience, but maybe the backtracking is adding to that. But you look at how long to beat, and I don't know how accurate that website is, but I seem to be getting close to the end, and the part of the story where I am at now, it seems to indicate that I am kind of in the stretch run of the game. So I probably won't talk about it again until I finish it. Hopefully, that's going to be soon, but we shall see. Now, I had a headline in my notes that I was going to talk about Starfield episode 1. Clearly, I have not watched I have not watched that show yet. But I figured that I would spend the remaining part of this video game portion of the podcast talking about the Star Wars Outlaws trailer, storyline, is that what we want to call it? The story trailer. And there has been some controversy over how Ubisoft has priced out the game. And there was an article, it came out today because Ubisoft put out a statement about it. And I will get into it because I was reading the IGN story before, because I wanted to see, before I talked about what was going on here, kind of what the latest was as far as this controversy. But first, the trailer itself, which I've probably watched about 5 or 6 times already. Look, I am a huge Star Wars mark. There is just something about it that tickles me in a way that I don't think any other franchise tickles me. I think the only thing that touches me, that does not sound right, impacts me in that way is probably old school WWF. Just as far as where things are in a pecking order in my fandom, my nerddom in my life, Star Wars is up there for me. It is always my go-to as far as wanting to watch something. I I enjoy the lore of it. I enjoy the, even when you have something like Andor that came out, what was it now, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, even something like Andor, while it was not, it didn't involve Jedi or the Force or anything like that. There's still foreshadowing. I love shows that do foreshadowing, and Andor did that for me, which in spades. And I'm not going to spoil it. But Andor, here's the thing: Andor is basically a prequel to the movie Rogue One, which is obviously a prequel to Episode 4 of Star Wars. And there's just something about that when you kind of combine a new story, but you make reference to things that come before it. And I know over the years, Star Wars has had that problem where it's relied too much on quote unquote the old guard. But people still appreciate that type of stuff because it's nostalgia. And I said it last week when I was talking about The Rock and WrestleMania. People love nostalgia. Nostalgia sells and people can't get enough of it. And there are suckers for it. And they will spend ungodly amounts of money on nostalgia. Keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that point about spending ungodly amounts of money on nostalgia. I think Ubisoft is onto something here. Anyway, going back to the trailer itself, that trailer, I'm banging on my on my laptop right now. That trailer, it sparked something in me because it's this new it's this new story that is taking place between episodes 5 and episode 6. So it's happening between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the original trilogy that is very near and dear to my heart, because I cannot tell you how many times I've seen those movies over the years. So you're taking a new story, which I love. It's the same thing with Andor. You're taking a new story with new characters and you're putting it in a familiar part of the timeline when it comes to Star Wars. And that instantly like sells me on it. Because when you're playing the game and you're watching the story trailer, it is showing stormtroopers. It is showing TIE fighters. And then during the story, guess where you fucking wind up? You wind up in Jabba the Hutt's palace. And when you're there, guess who's on the wall? It's Han Solo in the carbonite. Now, this is where the controversy starts. So I'm just going to go ahead and read parts of the IGN story from today, if I can find it. And here it is. Basically, the title, it's by Wesley Yinpool on IGN today. And the headline is Ubisoft response to Star Wars Outlaws season pass backlash. Insist Jabba the Hutt is part of the experience for all players. Now, this is where the controversy happened because they came under fire for locking this thing called the Jabba's Gambit mission behind what was already viewed as a very controversial season pass, which comes with the 109.99 gold edition. Think about how much that's fucking $40 more than the base game at $70. And then there's even this even more expensive $130 Ultimate Edition. And basically what the season pass says, and I'm going to quote it from here because they quote it themselves, play the exclusive Jabba's Gambit mission at launch. Just as Kay, who's the main protagonist in the game, is putting together a crew for the Canto Bight heist, she receives a job from Jabba the Hutt himself. Turns out that ND5 owes Jabba a debt from years ago and has come to collect. Now, this is what they say because there was a lot of controversy over this particular mission. And Ubisoft put out the statement to IGN today. Quote, to clarify, Jabba the Hutt and the Hutt Cartel are one of the main syndicates in Star Wars Outlaws and will be part of the experience for everyone who purchases the game, regardless of edition. A Ubisoft spokesperson told IGN. The Jabba's Gambit mission is an optional additional mission with the Hutt Cartel along Kay and Nix's journey across the Outer Rim. This mission will be available to those who purchase the season pass or an edition of the game which includes the season pass. So now they said here, however, this is IGN talking now. However, the scope of Jabba's Gambit mission remains unclear, leaving those who do not buy the season pass unsure what they're missing out on. Ubisoft, I don't know how the fuck, I forget how people, I've heard both ways say it. Ubisoft said that has said in the past that players can work for and even portray Jabba as the head of one of Star Wars Outlaws' criminal factions. By the way, if you're not familiar with the game, Outlaws, criminals, syndicates, crime, this is all about this is basically Italian mobsters in Star Wars is what I'm getting from this. And I fucking can't play to read it. Here's what I'm going to say about this, because I have seen a varying amount of takes about this since last week. I just think it's funny because when I was growing up, you bought a single player game and that was it. I didn't play a lot of them, but you bought fucking Super Mario Bros. 3. There was no fucking DLC in Super Mario Bros. 3. That was not a thing that existed. It wasn't until the advent of the internet and connected consoles that people really started taking advantage of this DLC. I'm sure it happened in the PC space way before consoles, but it wasn't until the advent of the internet on both PlayStation and Xbox that you really had this quote unquote DLC. That's what they used to call it back in the day. Downloadable content for those that need an explainer. I will say this. I have paid for these type of things in the past. And the most recent outside of Starfield, right? Because I paid to play it early, and it was 5 days early, and I get the first expansion, which we're still fucking waiting for. I did this for Hogwarts Legacy. And here's the thing. The controversy with the Hogwarts Legacy thing is that PlayStation 5 had an exclusive mission in it if you ordered it early, got the whatever edition it was. It came with a PS5 exclusive mission in the game. Now, I will say this because people are worried about the scope of the Jabba the Hutt thing. For those who played it and paid for the extra edition and got that PS5 exclusive mission, honestly, it was okay. It wasn't all that great. It was a little bit of a pain in the ass. I do remember because if I have this correctly, you kind of have to go through like this maze-like thing, and you're almost figuring out like a puzzle maze in some ways. And it was like this spooky type of thing, almost Halloween-related type of mission that was there. And at the end, you had to fight like this wizard. And I don't remember. He was either a wizard or a Death Eater. I forget what it was exactly. See, that's how not memorable this was. But I think about that, and I think, are you being hoodwinked into buying this thing, and the mission is not all that great? I am surprised that this thing, the next level up in the edition, is $110. Like, that is insane. I can see, if it was 80, okay, you got my fucking money. If it's $80, you probably have my money. 110 though? Like, what is, I want to see now exactly, like, what is coming with this? Let's see. Probably some digital art book shit. Let's take a sip of water. It's already for pre-order on Amazon. Let's see. So the Gold Edition includes 2 upcoming story pack DLCs. Doesn't really say what. And there's a pre-order thing of the Kessel Runner bonus pack. That's the Gold Edition. 3 days early, I think. Oh shit, no, Ultimate Edition only has 3 days early. That is fucking insane. Holy shit. So the Gold Ultimate Edition, you get 3 days early play. You get the pre-order Kessel Run. You get the 2 story pack things. You get this stuff called Ultimate Pack, and it looks like it's like different skins for like outfits and shit, and some speeder skins, it looks like. And then you get this digital you get this digital book, art book. And it's just like, if there was some kind of physical thing, like a fucking figure or something like that, I could justify paying this much for it. But fuck, man, $110 and $130 for these editions? Nah, man, I'm good. I'm gonna buy the game when it comes out. I'm going to enjoy it, and then I'm gonna go on YouTube and find a recap of the mission that I missed, and it's as simple as that. But anyway, I wanted to talk about that because I felt like, man, I there is so much that I loved about that trailer, and I was, as I say, nerding out about that trailer, that I thought to myself, I am fucking buying that game August 30th, day 1, and playing the shit out of it. That's going to be one of those games where I take my time playing it because I love being immersed in that world. So, that is going to do it for the video game portion of the Nerd Federation podcast. I'm going to pause this now. I'm going to pause the video, and hopefully this comes back sounding good. And yeah, we'll see what this sounds like in the audio. But stay right there. I'll be right back for talking about some pro wrestling. Okay, talk soon. And welcome back to the Nerd Federation podcast, episode number 22. I am your host, Will Hernandez. I got my water. I went to the bathroom. I'm checking on the Mets game. As of this time, top of the sixth already. This game's flying by. They're down 1-0. Mets have been playing well lately. They started off 0-5, I think it was, and now they're 8-8. So yeah, I don't think this team is going to make the playoffs, but we shall see how things go. And I wanted to start the pro wrestling portion of this podcast kind of looking back a little bit. And I have a note here, like it's the headline in my notes here for the week in this section about how the lapsed WWE fan was watching WrestleMania. Now we're going on to almost 2 weekends ago. And the question being, now what? Now what happens now that we're past WrestleMania 40? And again, the one thing I found interesting listening to podcasts over the past couple of weeks and internet, looking on Twitter and threads and stuff like that is that the lapsed WWE fan, some of them who haven't watched since the Attitude Era, believe it or not, and how they get back into WWE the past, let's say, couple of months because of The Rock's involvement leading up to WrestleMania 40. And some of the video game podcasts that I listen to, they're talking about, I watched both nights of WrestleMania. It's because of Rock, blah, blah, blah. And then they start doing like some history. It's really funny. If you're listening to this podcast right now, let me tell you something, brother. We are in the 1% of the 1% of fucking nerds, because it's interesting. I'll give you a perfect example. It was one podcast I'm listening to. This is from the Second Wind crew, and Marty Sleva was the host of one of the podcasts, the Firelink podcast that I listen to. So he starts talking a little bit about WrestleMania. The topic itself was just like, there's so much content out there between video games and movies and TV and comic books and books and whatnot. And Marty had thrown in pro wrestling into the mix because he said, I think I'm back watching this again. So he starts talking about Cody Rhodes a little bit. And it was interesting because he had no idea what happened with Cody Rhodes when he left WWE all those years ago. Like, no idea. So at one point, Marty is like, yeah, he left WWE to go his own, to do his own thing. He goes to Japan. He joins this thing called the Bullet Club. And I'm like, I had to laugh. Like, I had to laugh that this was the history lesson that he was doing, as far as getting into the weeds about these things and finding out about the Bullet Club. I just thought that was, he never made the connection about how the Bullet Club is basically the modern day version of the NWO. He didn't go that far into it, and maybe he's got some more research he has to do. But I thought it was interesting that people were taking it that far, that they were doing this type of research into this stuff. And here's what I'll say about this interest that the lapsed WWE fan might have right now. And I think it's a good thing, and I think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in the sense that whenever you can get more eyes on the product, that's a good thing. No one's ever going to complain about that. WWE is hot right now. They've sold out all of these the TV shows, Raws and SmackDowns and pay-per-views, right? They're on a big streak right now. There was a lot of attention on WWE leading into WrestleMania because of The Rock. There is no denying that whatsoever. But here's the bad thing. And this is something that I think was a problem with WWE the last 20 to 25 years, that WWE potentially has not and didn't build up enough memorable characters to keep people's interest, with the exception of a John Cena and with the exception of a post UFC Brock Lesnar, because there was a lot of interest in Brock when he came back to WWE after his UFC stint. He had made a name for himself, and people were interested now in Brock. The problem with that is that you had a part-time champion in a lot of ways. Well, not in a lot of ways. That was a reality. And they have, over the years since his reign as champion, kind of leaned on him too much in a part-time role. Comes and goes as he basically pleases. And now, well, we know what's happening right now with that whole thing with Brock and his involvement in the Janelle Grant lawsuit. And I think it's somewhat funny because that whole criticism about relying on part-timers, particularly when WWE has gone back to old reliables in the past for WrestleMania and for other storylines. I just think that criticism is kind of, I don't know. I don't know if it's really coming back, but when you build an entire WrestleMania, your WrestleMania 40 around a part timer, I don't know. Are you risking people not coming back? Because The Rock made it very clear on the Raw after WrestleMania. He's going to go away for a while, right? He's got to film. Dwayne has got to go film some movies now. And now you wonder, okay, when is the next time we're going to see this man in a full-on storyline with Cody Rhodes? Because we know that's the direction that they're going in right now, right? I mean, that is going to happen. They're going the full Cody route. We're going to get Rock versus Cody probably either at SummerSlam or at Survivor Series, or like I said, maybe a Saudi event. So the question now becomes, in my mind, if you're watching a WWE and you're a fan of WWE, is how they keep up this momentum, how they maintain this momentum. And I already saw somebody. The internet's it's funny. I didn't watch Raw this past week. I just didn't. Hey, listen, I didn't watch Collision on Saturday either. So I'm kind of there's only so much I can watch in a week, really. It's a lot. It's really a lot. But going back to WWE, going back to Raw, I already saw somebody say, "Oh, this Raw was like a step back." But I also know that every Raw can't be a banger. Listen, we're past. Historically, this has always happened. Even when I was watching WWE religiously, there's always this step back in what they do post WrestleMania, because now you have to ramp up and get big storylines going and start building going into SummerSlam, because that's really the next major show for them, right? So you've got that. But also keep in mind that they're selling out TV events, like I said. I'm not too sure how the house show business is going. I know they're doing less house shows than they've ever before. Thank God, finally, giving these guys a bit of a break. But it's also, and girls, it's also going to come down to compelling stories, because I think that's what drives WWE. And I saw this comparison somewhat. I'm kind of rejiggering it for my use, but WWE has become like comfort food for a lot of people. And it is like, it is the Amazon or Walmart of professional wrestling. I mean, it just is. For better or worse, it is. It's the popular thing, right? It's always going to be the only thing in some people's minds, unfortunately. And, that's just kind of the way things go. But I think the other question that you can ask coming off of all this momentum for WWE is, how do these other promotions cash in on the momentum? And what I mean by that, if you go back pre-pandemic, there was, I would say, a 3 to 4 year period before the pandemic. Let's just call it 2015 to 2019. That there was just this huge resurgence of the independent pro wrestling scene. And I saw it with my own eyes. I've said many times that I would go to AAW in Chicago, and it was a super independent. I mean, you had some of the people you see on your TV screen today were a huge part of AAW all those years ago. And I'm talking about Eddie Kingston. I'm talking about Penta. I'm talking about Phoenix, Mustafa Ali, uh, Heidi Lovelace, who is, oh my God, I can't even, how the hell did I pull that name out of my ass? Heidi is now Ruby Soho. Oh my God, I had to think about that for a second. You had Matt Riddle was there as well. You had a bunch of TNA guys from that 2015 to 2019 era that were on those AAW shows. It was huge. There was a resurgence happening for whatever reason. It could have been because people were just tired of WWE. I don't know. I always thought it was interesting when I started talking to people around me that they vehemently, I completely said that, vehemently, just like despised WWE and what it turned into. And they thought that even with NXT, which was starting to really be a thing, that it was already kind of too late in their minds and they just couldn't stand. I remember sitting next to somebody at an AAW show. It was Mustafa Ali's last match with AAW before he went to WWE. And the guy saying like, "Yeah, man, I'm so upset that he's going to WWE because they're gonna fucking ruin him." You know what? They fucking ruined him. So that guy was right on about that. Sip more water here, quick. The thing is that at that point, well, I really had a long pause there. AAW was, I guess, cashing in on the, I don't know, people were just tired of WWE. You also have to understand, too, you had the likes of Colt Cabana, who was really bringing uh, a spotlight to the independent scene. And then when you have somebody like Cody Rhodes leave WWE, and he had that infamous picture with the list. Remember that? He had all these guys that he wanted to wrestle on the independent scene. Then he goes to New Japan, joins Bullet Club, the Elite's there, and the rest there is really history. They really cashed in on the momentum during that period. I think now wrestling is getting hot again in many ways. It was very shaky there because of the pandemic. A lot of the independent scene suffered because of the pandemic, and now we're finally getting back to normal here. And now go back to the question of how do you cash in? It's interesting because we saw over the weekend, and I will talk about this, New Japan's Windy City Riot. They had a near sellout or a sellout Friday night. And that's a really nice building for pro wrestling. I've been there. I was there. It's Wintrust Arena. I was there for Revolution 2020. Little did we know the world was going to shut down like 2-3 weeks later there. Anyway, but You look at AEW, and AEW is still having issues with week to week TV attendance. I don't know why, for the life of me, they're going to be tomorrow from when I'm recording this at the field house in Indiana, and the place is only set up for like fucking 3,000 tickets. That's like a double digit arena. I don't understand. Like, they got to get back to, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. That BU campus sized arena that's like 6,000 people, they need to get back to those types of arenas. They just have to. For now, just get back to those type of arenas, and then you do like the big shows at the big arenas. Look, Dynasty's almost sold out. I think it's set up for like 6,500, and they're about 400 tickets away from a sellout. That's probably going to sell out. So it's a really weird time for AEW from that perspective with the week to week in the television there. But you look at TNA, and they're really struggling to sell tickets to Saturday's pay-per-view in Vegas. And a lot of that's because they were just in Vegas. And I mentioned way back when, I think it was after Hard to Kill, that there was a rumor going around that they were going to run this particular pay-per-view at the Hammerstein Ballroom in the city, in New York City. And that didn't pan out. And they decided to go back to Vegas. I'll tell you this right now. They made a huge fucking mistake by putting that show back in Vegas. They should have had it in New York City, because I guarantee you that that show would have sold out. And again, looking back at the promotions and the momentum, and for all the doom and gloom that people like to put out there about AEW, AEW is fine. AEW is not going anywhere. When Warner Brothers Discovery is giving you a shout out in its Q1 press release, and your programming between your three shows is averaging 4 million viewers a week, you're not in trouble, because there are a lot of people that would kill for those type of numbers that AEW programming is doing right now in this day and age in cable television. And you know what? WWE is doing great numbers as well. So let's not complain about the TV numbers per se, about the fucking ratings. New Japan is going to be fine as well. They sold out Sakura Genesis earlier this month. I think it was like 4,000 or 5,000 people that they fit into that arena. They sold out Chicago. They're good. The issue right now, I have to admit, I'm a little worried, is TNA is the one promotion that would really benefit from cashing in on WWE's momentum. And I think a lot of people thought that was going to start happening when Jordan Grace made an appearance at this year's Royal Rumble. And many people thought that was going to be the beginning of some kind of partnership between TNA and WWE. But I do wonder if Scott D'Amore not being there now had any impact, no pun intended there, on future plans. There's also a part of me that thinks, because TNA has lasted 22 years, that it's not going anywhere, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think it's funny in the context of AEW, because people think that AEW is dying. And again, I'm not saying that AEW doesn't have its issues, because it does. But Tony Khan has deep fucking pockets, and he can mask some of those issues. Okay. Pause there. Speaking of AEW, let's talk about Windy City Riot on last Friday. And I think before we talk about Windy City Riot, we have to talk about what happened on Dynamite last week. Now, there was a lot of controversy about this footage that the Young Bucks were going to show, and that they did show, and people thought it was a work, and it wasn't a work. This was not a work. But in the context now, because context is king, as Eric Bischoff likes to say, in the context of the storyline at hand for the Young Bucks, the storyline at hand for FTR, The storyline at hand for Jack Perry. And I took a look at that. And then you look at what happened over the weekend with Perry and New Japan Riot. And holy shit. Mission accomplished, as they say. I just here's the thing that, and there's been a lot of shit going on today about what Tony Schiavone said in regard to people thinking that he was upset about the Young Bucks, about the video. Bro, he was playing his role to perfection. That's the thing. And the thing is, too, Tony Schiavone does not give a fuck what you think or what anybody else thinks. And I think it's silly that people were saying that, hey, he's just saying that because of who pays his paycheck, who pays him. Let me tell you something. Listen to that fucking podcast. Tony is being very sincere there. And again, he just does not give a shit what the fuck you think about his facial expressions to sell something that was being done by the heels that are the EVPs. He doesn't care. So say what you want. He just doesn't give a shit. Go watch that video because it was making the rounds today because he was talking to Conrad Thompson about all that stuff. And he was basically going to tell his listeners to fuck off. So that says a lot about Tony Schiavone and what he's thinking these days. I mean, for him to come out and say he didn't really give a shit about the footage itself, he doesn't care. It doesn't affect him, right? He would have. That's a guy with his own free will saying that stuff. Anyway, the one thing I'm going to say about the footage itself and kind of the aftermath of it. So I still think that, listen, we're in 2024. I'm sorry, we are. This is not 25, 30 years ago. And this is not even being like a fucking like woke thing or anything like that, because I fucking hate that term. Just hate it because it's lost its meaning at this point. But I would like to think that we have evolved as human beings, right? That's hit or miss right now, honestly, with the way the direction that this country is going. And I would be saying that regardless of who was in charge, because I'm one of those people. I don't care who the hell's in charge. Shit's been going down south for a long, long time through multiple parties in charge. Anyway, but I like to say that I have evolved as a person over the years. So I am now looking at a lot of these situations very differently now. Two things. Punk, and I said this on Threads, and I'm reading this directly from Threads. Punk, as the veteran, should have been the bigger person in that situation because that's what a veteran is supposed to do. Number two, if I had done that to a coworker and then lunged at my boss, I would have been fired on the spot because that is what happens in the real world. And who knows if charges would have been pressed in that situation. I have been in situations in my work career very early on that I lost my cool, and while I did not strike anybody physically, did something that could be construed as very aggressive, and I was sent home for the day because of it. I didn't get fired, but I was forced to kind of sit down and mediate and talk out my issues. That was 25 years ago that people were doing that. I don't care that pro wrestling is like this, I don't know, wild, wild west. You still can't be doing that shit. I don't care, regardless of how many times they told Jack Perry to cut it out. Punk is not the boss. Tony Khan is. And yeah, probably Punk is right. Khan might be a nice guy, but he's not a boss character. And I said it a couple of weeks ago, last week, where Tony Khan, I think, just needs to be the money guy going forward and get other people to run the day-to-day creative and maybe even the backstage stuff as well, to be the good cop and the bad cop. Scott D'Amore's out there. Maybe it needs to be him. Anyway, that's it. I'm not going to talk about the impact of the tape anymore. I saw some really bad takes about that because apparently workplace violence is okay now. I don't know. I've been there and done that. So I think I have a different perspective. And then somebody had like the audacity, some current wrestler, which I don't even know who the fuck this guy was, reposts that thread and then lists like 6 or 7 reasons. And it wasn't even worth me arguing over it because that guy's mind is made up because he's in the biz, brother, and he knows better than anybody else. One thing I thought it was funny, he was bad-mouthing AEW, but I wonder if AEW came knocking on the door and say, hey, can you do a Ring of Honor match for us? Is he going to say no? Is he going to regret that at the end of the day? You got to think before you put shit out there on the internet, brother. I'll tell you that right now. Anyway, this tape is out there, right? One of the Bucks is wearing a Scapegoat t-shirt. Guess what happened? That t-shirt sold out. Like that. Perry's also got 3 t-shirts out there right now. I don't know if they're on the New Japan store or not. Those things are going to sell out. Now, fast forward to Friday night, 2 days later. I will talk about Friday night from 2 perspectives. 1, the Jack Perry perspective, and 2, the overall presentation of Windy City Riot and the craziness that ensued that night in various different ways. Now, one thing, let's talk about the Perry stuff first. By the way, great show. It was a great show. Like from top to bottom, they really came and brought it on Friday night. I thought every match, with the exception of that street fight, and I am just sick and fucking tired of street fights. I'm done with that. Like, I would be okay if pro wrestling never had another street fight because I am like tapped out of street fights right now. That being said, the rest of the matches, banger after banger after banger, man. I was really, really impressed with that Vaker and AZM match. And like right 5 minutes into the match. And Azuma, is that the way Azuma, her speed was like off the charts. And I mentioned this on Twitter, on social media, how I thought I was really impressed by that match because it was hard hitting, it was smooth, and their contrast of styles worked really, really well together. Again, just a really great women's wrestling match from 2 talented females there in the ring. Now I'm going to talk about Perry because the Perry match came after that whole thing. And I'm watching my Mets are rallying. They just tied the game 1-1. Bottom of the 7th. There's 1 out. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. Somebody had an RBI single here. That was a double down the line, down the left field line into the corner. Ball rattles around. Alonso comes around second base, and they don't send him home. So the Mets got second and third right now with 1 out, and Alvarez is up, who's been struggling big time. He's already down 0-2 in the count. Got 2 strikeouts tonight. You like this play-by-play that I'm giving you people? Man, I feel like I missed my fucking calling here. But, okay. So, Jack Perry comes out. What a fucking, what a fucking presentation here. This guy is eating this shit up. He is leaning into it. I'm going to get into a little bit later about why that might not be the best thing long term. But Let's talk about what's going on here. He comes to the ring surrounded by guards in Riot gear and draped in a Chicago flag while also wearing a jacket that says Cry Me a River. And he is being booed out of the building. Don't forget where they are. They're in Chicago, the second city. He's being booed out of the building. But you know what was also interesting about that? There were cheers happening. People were cheering him as Alvarez flies out to shadow left field. Still runners on second and third with 2 outs. Anyway, I got to stop doing this. Apologies. So he is getting cheers. People are eating this shit up, man. They are into it. Now people are into it. You're coming off of what happened on Wednesday with the release of the tape. By the way, it is very clear that Jack Perry is coming back to AEW and he's going to join the Elite. I mean, you're going to have this new Elite of the Young Bucks, Jack Perry, and Okada very, very soon. Maybe as soon as this Sunday at Dynasty. It makes me think Dynasty, All Elite for okay. Anyway, people are eating this shit up. Now, Perry loses. But I don't think that mattered. He was playing to that fucking crowd, man. He really was. There was at one point where he does the high knee into the corner that Punk does, and that got a fucking response. That got a huge response. Then, I think it was after that move, he does the whole, go to sleep thing to the side and gets on his knees and like stays in that position for a while and is doing that. And then he tries to put the GTS on Umino, and that didn't work out. But hey, it happens. Umino wins. Jack does the job. Maybe, I don't know if it's his last match in New Japan because you figure he's still going to be heavily involved with House of Torture. But hey, again, just a great presentation here, and I am so fucking interested. They got me. Listen, I don't know if I think it's because I'm looking for stories in my pro wrestling, and I get frustrated a little bit that AEW does not have enough of them. And as somebody who loves stories, who used to be a journalist and enjoys stories, I think this Perry thing can be a great story. And if you're getting him involved with the Elite, I think in some ways the possibilities there are endless. Now, as for the rest of the show, there's really only one thing to talk about with the rest of the show, and that is the main event and the fact that John fucking Moxley is now the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Nobody saw that coming. I don't think, listen, people want to say, based on some of the interviews that he did going into the match, that it was apparent that he was going to win. I don't know about that. And I'll tell you why. New Japan, and I've said this before, can be very predictable. They just are. They can be very predictable. So Naito wins his title match against Yota Tsuji almost 2 weeks ago at Sakura Genesis. Showing title match now for the IWGP Heavyweight title in Chicago. I mean, I just never thought that they would have Naito lose his title so quickly. He's only been champion since the first week of January. And I think he's only had like 2 title defenses in that time. 2 or 3 maybe. So I think that's where the surprise comes from. So they pull the trigger on this, and I was just like fucking dumbfounded over it. I was just like, holy shit. there are very few times, with the exception of, and I'm not even counting what happened with the Undertaker at WrestleMania 40. That doesn't count from the perspective of match results. I am talking about match results. I have not been that surprised in a very, very long time. And it's because New Japan is very predictable with its booking and has been for a while. So when you have something like this, when you have a full-time wrestler of another promotion come in and win your top prize, I don't know about you, but I've got questions. And maybe we're going to get some answers tomorrow night from when I'm recording this, because Moxley is going to be on Dynamite tomorrow night. But if you look at the next major card for New Japan, and I'm going to bring it up right now, he's already going to be the main event at the next big pay-per-view. And he's going to fight Ren Narita for his first title match. And that is, let me just make sure. I think it's May 3rd or May 4th is when he is going to be defending that title for the first time. Let me just check. It's a big weekend, the first weekend of May. Of course, when I'm, gonna be doing my I'll be at TNA. Yeah. So this is it. May 4th, Saturday, May 4th, Wrestling Down Otaku. This is gonna be his main event here against Ren Narita for the heavyweight title. So because Ren came out and Moxley, after the match, was gonna challenge Umino. Was like, hey, this is like, it's funny because it was like almost like a final boss situation in some ways. And Ren Narita comes out and attacks Moxley and basically lays down the challenge for the IWGP Heavyweight title. But, I've got questions. How long is Moxley going to be gone? I mean, I think that's like the big thing. And I'm looking now. It's funny. I probably should have looked this up. Is he going to be on tour as well? Let's see. They got the match lineups for this stuff already here. And I'm just trying to see in real time if he's involved with any of these shows leading up into Wrestling Donataku. He is not on some of these shows. But I think what they're going to do is they're going to have him go away for a little bit. And, he'll make some appearances like here and there for both New Japan and AEW, and then we'll see what happens at Forbidden Door. But it's crazy, man. Like, I just, again, surprised that happened. He becomes, believe it or not, the first pro wrestler to win the AEW World Title, the WWE World Title, and the IWGP Heavyweight Title. So, as I said on social media on Friday night, color me shocked, because I cannot believe that actually happened on Friday night. So that's New Japan Windy City Riot. And listen, you got a big, again, like I said, a big pro wrestling weekend coming up. You've got TNA on Saturday night. You got AEW on Sunday night. And I think the big match that I'm looking forward to this weekend, I mean, it's got to be Ospreay and Danielson. I can't. Who else would it be? I mean, that is like a dream match, and people want to make fun of AEW for their dream matches. But listen, as a pro wrestling fan, that is a match that I want to see between two of the very, very best in the business, and one of them in Danielson being one of my favorites that's out there. So I'm really looking forward to Sunday night, and it should be a great weekend of wrestling. I'm looking forward to TNA on Saturday. I am going to watch it. I am going to order it and watch it. I'm going to watch Impact on Thursday and try to get myself reacclimated, because I really do want to start getting back into TNA, especially if I'm going to be going to a pay-per-view coming up here soon. So Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It should be a really good weekend for pro wrestling. It should be a really good weekend for my video game play. So that's going to do it for episode number 22 of the Nerd Federation podcast. Again, as I always ask in these situations, as the Mets have a 3-1 lead now in the bottom of the seventh inning, I always ask if you found this podcast to be, you enjoyed it. It was good. You had a good time listening to me ramble for almost an hour and a half. Please share it. Please share the podcast. I'm also on all the socials. I am hoping to have this video up hopefully tomorrow, Thursday. I don't know yet. The audio version will come first, obviously, because that's just going to be easier for me to do. I'm going to have to do some magic here with this video because I am not somebody who edits video very well. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye.